So I am very, very honored and so excited to be having our guest speaker and having the opportunity to introduce him. Jay Julius is a fisherman, the former chairman and councilman at the Lummi Nation. Jay was a leader in the fight to protect Cherry Point. He organized and executed tribal, local, regional, and national campaigns. A bridge builder, he uses empathy and storytelling to bring people together. Jay has an organization, and I'm not going to try and say it. Cecilia. And Cecilia, their mission says that their workshops, symposiums, forums, and direct action campaigns bring people and organizations into a deeper and truer understanding of Indigenous histories and worldviews. They offer strategies for integrating ancestral knowledge into politics, policies, projects, and partnerships, all with the will and rights and right and respectful relations. So thank you for coming, and I'm going to turn the microphone over to Jay.
Thank you, Giles, and thank you for the invite. Thank you to all of you, and thank you for your voice. Thank you for your work. The tireless work all of you do. I'm very grateful. And I know sometimes it feels like we question whether we're making a difference or not because the challenge, you need me to step back. Okay. But I think days like today, months like this, first of all, I want to thank you for honoring the J42, J44, 115. For us, that's so important to use the word honor and not just throw it around like it's not just an English word. So what you did today, thank you for that, because for us, that's what's important, and that's, I believe, what we do. We are honoring the callings, we are honoring the duties, the sacred obligations when we look at the work of, I'll speak for my past in leadership, and my grandfather and great-grandfather and their leadership is the sacred obligation to understand that we weren't the first ones here. Even the Indigenous people were not the first ones here. And I'm going to start by, my name is Jay Julius. My traditional name is Quatahlum, and I am a member of the Lummi Nation. I'm a fisherman, lifelong fisherman, and my relationship with the Southern residents began probably at an age of 2, is what I'm guessing, fishing with my father here on the west side of San Juan, Stewart, Point Roberts, and all around the San Juan Islands. And I got this scar on my head right here still. I think I was 5 minutes before I was told not to run on the boat. I ran on the boat. I busted my head open, and I'll never forget that moment. But that's around the time I was introduced, and I was sharing with someone yesterday one of my greatest memories, or most vivid memories as a child fishing. Our boat only did like 9 knots, so we traveled slow, and we would frequent the Southern residents. It felt like all the time when I was a child, and they would swim next to our boat. But I remember seeing the texture of the skin of the Southern residents, the sun shining on it, and them swimming on their side, and seeing an eye. I'll never forget that when I was a little kid. It just sticks in my mind. But I come from a family of reef netters, and on multiple corners of my family, on my mother's side, her mother, Snina, her father's name was Quatahlum, which my son and I carry that name. And you would find his name in Lummi Indians of Northwest Washington, a book written by Bernard Stern, published in 1930. And he kind of goes through the genealogy and reef net ownership and how that was passed down. And then a signatory of the treaty, Thomas Jefferson. We were named interesting names way back at the arrival of newcomers, but Thomas Jefferson was a signatory of a treaty and had a reef net, multiple reef net locations, but one at Fisherman's Bay, Lopez, here on San Juan, Lummi Island, Cheltenham, Point Roberts. And for me, it's important to share that because that was 6 generations ago. I was raised by Huatatlam and Snina. They were born in 1888 and 1892. So it makes me, to put into perspective what the Southern residents are going through as far as being managed to extinction right now, is I was one hug away from pre-contact. And it helps put into the timelines and help us understand as human beings that this didn't happen a long time ago. And it's not like Europe where it took 1,000, 2,000 years to drive the salmon to extinction. Here, the timeframes have completely collapsed. So if we look at it from a treaty signing time when the immigrant sovereign, the United States, entered into a treaty with the sovereigns of this land, which included the Southern residents, which clearly includes the salmon, that was only 16 and a half decades ago. 16 decades ago. And look what we've done. So if we really put it into perspective and we look at the need for urgency for us to change, not the climate, not find a wrench big enough to fix the problem that we have created, but I think our philosophies we need to evaluate and really look back on that time frame when Montgomery wrote a great book that lays out the timeline of, it's called King of Fish. And he lays out the timeline and the struggles in Europe to save the salmon or not drive them to extinction. I think save the salmon is the wrong word or way to put it. But he lays out the timelines pretty well. And it helps us put into perspective where we're at here, and then helps us understand what we've done to the Southern residents and the ecosystem here and everything that was here long before us. Interesting. This is recording and writing. Sorry. I don't know how many of you knew Bill James, Chief Bill James of the Lummi, Salik? Yeah. He passed away 3 years ago, June 1st, and I want to honor him as well and acknowledge him because through the work, my 3 terms as a elected leader at Lummi, he was really the driving force on principle leadership and leading by values, not what's politically correct. And yeah, he passed 3 years ago, but I just want to give you an example of a call to action from Lummi back in 2017, 2018, 2019. One with Tokatai going to Miami and demanding her story be told, and the release of Tokatai. The chief helped lead that, and he was really our rock. He stood with us when it became politically challenging. And also the feeding of the orca when we witnessed the peanut heads and when we witnessed the baby being pushed by her mother and the deep grieving and mourning that we witnessed from that mother really helped change the trajectory on the ability to get the story out, the truth about their realities. But I just looked at a photo down at the seafood market here the other day, and it's myself and the chief putting a king salmon in the water, feeding the orca, but NOAA told us we can't do it. The feds told us we couldn't do it, wasn't allowed. And they said if we did it and moved forward, that we would be arrested. They would meet us out on the water and stop us from doing it. We let them know that we would be on our enforcement's boat. We weren't asking permission. We were just notifying. The fish are the southern residents are starving. And this was really led by the chief and carried out by elected leadership. And I just wanted to share that and so much more action that the Lummi had taken and is still taking today, not just leadership, but the people. And there's so much we can all do. And I think for me, lately, I was asked to speak at Gonzaga the week of Earth Day, and then Seattle U on Earth Day, and then CBEC to the Lutheran leaders of Washington, all within a week, which is interesting. because it makes this conversation around Southern residents and the managing to extinction of species a lot easier when I have found, and especially that week, when their creation story is the same. And when we look at their creation story in those three organizations I spoke to that week, they're all faith. It was all faith-based, and it was just interesting that they all requested I speak at particular events on that particular week. But what was interesting is, as we reflect on their creation story and the creation story, and we have a creation story too, all creation stories, or none of the creation stories that I have found, humans are first. It's always everything else. It's earth, it's moon, it's sun, it's water, it's trees, it's everything. All these living things were created before us. And then we came last. The Creator didn't instruct Noah to build a boat and gather every species of humans, 2 of each, put them on a boat and prepare for a flood. No, it was you grab your family and you grab 2 of every animal. So what does that say? From a common sense perspective, if we really think about that. But for me, in giving that thought, and for us, it really takes me to a question of what have we done? But more importantly, what can we do? How can we change our ways? Not point the finger, because that'll get us nowhere. But if we can identify our human philosophies that have gotten us to where we are today, what do those look like? What got us here? Was it about the $600 from the feds or $600 license we buy from the feds to capture a killer whale? I'm not sure if that number's right. From the state, it was much less. Was it that behavior? Is it pollution? Is it industry? I'm not sure exactly what the whole answer is, but it's our philosophy. It's our leadership philosophy. It's how we create policies to justify to do what. So who are we? What have we become as human beings? And is it okay that we put ourselves up here and everything that was here before us, including the water, including the land, including the southern residents, including the salmon and the rivers? Who have we become? What are we? Because I think if they could speak, we are the invasive species. We fight so hard to make sure green crab don't take over out here. And there's so many other invasive species out in these waters and in these places and in the trees right now. I don't know if the caterpillars are, but there's so many different invasive species, and we fight and work so hard to identify them, and we dump money into stopping it. But if everything else can speak, what are we? Because, and if we really think about that, I think at this moment in time, in our children and future policymakers, we can reflect on some mistakes that we made, some philosophies that we carry on today, and how do we're all indigenous from somewhere, all of us. I just happen to be from here. And I happen to be only 6 generations from this, what is a new world for most. It's an old world for me, but this is a new way of living for me. Yeah, who are we? And what have we become? And is it okay? Because if we look at Europe's history and how long it took, and we look at us right now and we read about us 500 years from now, and you look at the trajectory and you look at the time frames and collapse them, it's not an easy mathematic equation, but I think it's pretty simple to figure out that in 16 decades we've done this. And really here it was about timber. Really, it wasn't about salmon until my people weren't not able to fish until like 1895 was our first court case against the Alaska Packers, but it was timber before. So they deleted rivers because there was a fork and a split, and they deleted this part so that the timber could run down into the bay and get over here more convenient. So it was the mountains that were scalped first. So really, it's not 16 decades to drive the salmon to extinction. It's a lot less. So what is that, and that brings us to the question, okay, what does that look like based on this trajectory where we're going to go? And this is not to instill fear. It's just, I think we need to think about our reality that has gotten us here. And how do we shift the rudder just a little bit? Because the philosophies from Europe landed on the East Coast, and it didn't take very long to drive the Atlantic salmon to extinction. Now we know where the Sacramento River salmon are. If not extinct, they're very, 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 very little. Now is the Columbia. We see the struggle with the Nez Perce, Yakima, Umatilla fighting to remove the dams because they've lived and harvested salmon this big. The southern residents used to eat 2 to 4 a day and they were good. Now they don't exist. June hogs don't exist anymore. So what does that mean? Next is us. And this is where, for me, it's painful. For me, it's us as salmon people are being managed to extinction too, not just the southern residents, not just the salmon, but I'm connected. It's who I've been through thousands of years of genealogy as salmon people. We're part of that. And I know that's hard to fathom or understand, but fishing is culture and culture is fish. It's who we are. It's our everything. It's our school. It's our education. So this is where it becomes emotional, urgent, and worth fighting for, because we're the last corner. You got Alaska, you got here right where you're at, you got Alaska, and then it's done. And based on history and based on philosophies that got us to where we are, in the supremacy mindset and dominant mindset over everything of the natural world, the inevitable future is dim, but I have hope. We have to hold on to hope, in my opinion. Otherwise, it'll just happen. I think we can stop it. I think speaking for the southern residents, speaking for the salmon, speaking for the rivers is not for me, an English word. It's not an environmental thing. It's a way of life. It's connection to who we are. And then going back to the question, who are we as a human species? And if everything that belongs here, we don't necessarily belong here. But if they could speak, what are we? Who are we? And if we answer that question honestly, how do we shift? How can we do it together? And it's a lot of common sense blended with science, but I think common sense is missing a lot. And kids hold on to that. They have simple answers, and that's where it's at. So that's kind of my, as a local, as a Lummi, as a individual whose family's been here since the beginning of time. That's where we're at in terms of relationship with. We're not supreme over, dominant over, we're less than. So how do we all get back to equal to, or make us a little bit less than, or treat them like givers of life? They're all connected to all of our mother, giver of life. We cease to exist without our mother that we have in common. Because this is all connected. Everything is connected. It's all interconnected. So yeah, and now I'll move a little bit into our nonprofit. It's called Cecilia. We have 6 board members, and Cecilia right now is working to create an ability to feel what you might hear the southern residents say when they push their child around for 17 days, and how deeply painful that is to try to speak your language, speak my language, and feel their struggles. What starvation is, what brink of extinction is, what in such a short period of time. Cecilia is working on one project right now where bringing empathy in a way that we rarely feel when we're listening or hearing or talking. Utilizing virtual reality to not escape reality, but bring the past back to life. So if we can create an experience where the Southern residents, and you can see them in their ancestors 500 years ago and what that looked like in the invitation process to what we call the transients, and what did that ceremony and process look like? What is an invite? Why an invite? Where did they travel to? What did the food look like? What did their ecosystem look like? What did their world look like? And of course, that world included us fishing side by side with them with a respectful relationship, not a dominance over, but a relationship where we learned from the salmon what being a giver of life is, what sacrificing your life for the future generation is. We learned family, community, feeding one another from the Southern residents, how to grieve, how to mourn, how to take care of one another. So bringing that back to life is one of the projects we're working on right now, and is supposed to launch this month. And amongst other things within that virtual reality experience, which will be right here at Friday Harbor. Yeah, it's empathy at a level that we don't see very often. And that's the hopes, is to allow the Southern residents to speak, not from my perspective, not from your perspective, but what is their perspective, and what did their world look like? What did the salmon's world look like? What is it, a world where you go out and live for 4 years, you come back and you sacrifice your life for the future generation? If a salmon could speak, what would they say? So that's some of the things we are working on at Cecilia. And I'm gonna pause there, Giles. And if you want to have a conversation, or if there's still more time, I would be happy to engage. Yeah, absolutely. Nonprofit? It's SESILE. That's correct. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's the beauty of it, is we're starting, obviously just launching, but MIT was in this room with us a month ago, and one of our bigger projects will be with MIT, and what I love about what we're creating is it's not just ours. It's if there's a way to tell the story and show the Snake River dams coming down and feeling that and what it looks like, and what the river coming back to life and flowing again, and June hogs coming back up, and creating that in a virtual world, and being able to show policymakers or the communities and people what that feels like through artificial intelligence and virtual reality, then it's theirs too. Using it for the good and to tell the story where stories lack in an ability to be told through English language. Yeah, that's the goal, is to make it available to anyone and everyone where a good story needs to be told for the good.
Really cool thing to do in that venue might be to, or through that medium, would be to talk about and teach people about reef netting, about traditional ways of fishing that we don't learn about. And, you know, from a salmon's perspective and from the longevity of a species, that's really the way that we should be fishing.
Mm-hmm.
So could you tell us a little bit about reef netting and that big of a...
No. You're, I agree 100%, because that is an experience that will be created. All the way down to making the net and using the stinger nettle twine, the strong twine from stinger nettles, that process and how it was done, and what it's evolved to, and why a reef net is a reef net, and sustainability, where there's a hole in the reef net to allow passage even after our salmon ceremonies take place once the fish start running. No, exactly. Yeah, it's just the beginning, and even virtual art is something that is there now through one of our partners. But yeah, I mean, the vision is big, and the possibilities are exciting. I know artificial intelligence and virtual reality, for me, I don't have Facebook, I don't have social media and things like that, so I would steer clear from this in the past. But as I became friends with an individual who his authenticity for change in the world, and the Southern residents and salmon and nature and everything that relationship built, and I see the good possibilities with all of it and telling a story. Yep. Okay. Yep. Yes.
What was the feedback that you received back, and do you think they understand and have a deep understanding of what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. No, the connection with the faith organizations, I think Lummi, the oldest church in Whatcom County is on the Lummi Reservation. I think every reservation you go to is probably going to have closest to the oldest Catholic church. Obviously, the United States government used the Catholic faith with boarding schools in the US, kill the Indian, save the man. So it's a faith that is deeply rooted over the last 6 generations here within communities. So communicating with faith organizations for myself, growing up in a Catholic church, baptized in a Catholic church, going to catechism since I was very little, it's been rewarding, because asking questions related to faith and scripture and Bible, and then questioning our leadership as humans and people of creation and everything of creation, and then really taking a look at what we do, how we justify it, and then raising the question, who have we become? How do we do this? How do we justify doing this to something that is supreme to any president of the United States or any leader elected or the richest man? I mean, it's above all of that when there's faith. So relating and using basic things like Noah's Ark really allows us to go back to common sense and really look at that and think about that and our mindset as humans over everything that is. And we were last. We're just one species, but we can honestly take responsibility for whatever the reality is up to this day. It points back to no one else or nothing else but us. Maybe not everything. I don't know. I'm not but a lot. Salmon, Southern residents, Salish Sea. So very effective and much easier than some other groups. Thank you. How Lummi is involved with Tokutai. I can speak to the past. As far as where they're at today, I cannot speak to. I'm not an elected, and I do not speak for the Lummi as a whole, as a governing body. But in the past, I think, as I stated earlier, the chief and elected leadership, take seriously one of our oldest stories about a boy becoming a killer whale. And I know this might sound silly or foolish or myths, but it helps us understand relationship versus dominance and equality and equal to and not supreme over or less than. And then if you read about relatives under the water, is what we refer to Quethalmachtin as, it helps one understand why it's a relative. So the chief would always share with students here and all over the state of Washington, the boy in the Blackfish, the boy in the Quethalmachtin, and the boy who became a Quethalmachtin. And that took place at Laktamish, Laktamish is a place. You'll hear Lummies referred to as the Laktamish people, but it's actually a place here on this island. So between Spiden and San Juan, you see whirlpools, and the story includes those whirlpools and this boy's fascination with the Southern residents who would always come in, and he established a relationship and fascination with them. And one day he disappeared and he lived with his grandmother. And story goes, he went under and he found he could breathe. And he found there was longhouses, and he found he can speak their language. And and the story is a little bit longer than that, but it helps us understand what, for us, relationship and being one with everything that is. We have a story for everything, which creates a bond, creates a willingness to fight for with authenticity. It's not something that looks fun and looks good. No, it's an obligation. So the Lummi in 2017 and 2018, the Southern residents were obviously starving, inability to give birth. The chances of the babies living were slim and still are today. So that's, and then Tokatai and the last remaining kidnapped whale, Southern resident Quethalmachtin from here, still alive in Miami. And Linda Mapes does a really good job of speaking to her and this story in her book and in numerous articles and reports on the Southern residents. But 2018, we really initiated that from Lummi's standpoint and demanded her return, which now 5 years later, we're seeing a lot of movement. Things obviously don't happen right away, but for me, it felt like the beginning of first the feeding. The state, working with the state and feds and so many different agencies becomes a huge, huge challenge. So we went out and fed them, and more importantly, we did a ceremonial spiritual feeding with the chief that was private, but took place out here and then finished at Henry Island. And then 2018 was the demand, and I think now we see some tangible results in Indianapolis Colts owners stepping up and fighting for this, and Seaquarium being sold, and new ownership with a willingness and desire to possibly return her home. I don't know exactly what that looks like, and I don't think Lummi does, and there's a lot of challenges, but it's possible. We have to believe, I have to believe it's possible, and not overthinking it, and hopefully we don't overthink it till it's too late. Because I was chairman of Lummi Nation at the time in 2018 and went to Florida, and we tried to make it heavily publicized. So Adam Beach, an actor, Native American actor, joined us and got the message out. And I think it's created a great movement since then. And we're coming together here today. And I think we're coming together, and the story is it has become a national story, which is sometimes what is needed to help good leaders develop the political will to do what needs to be done. Because that's a lot of times what's lacking, is that political will or challenge with the constituent basis. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay. You want me to repeat that? I think some of the changes, simple changes for myself is number one, I guess one of the questions I find myself asking in different places on the East Coast. I spoke at MIT and asked the students and audience, where are you from? And most will say America. And I ask them to go back further. No, really, where are you indigenous from? Because we're all indigenous from somewhere and we all come from a place. But then one question I think that is important for all of us to ask is when, if it did, if a relationship, a philosophy and a relationship to nature, being one with nature, not above, dominant, or supreme over. If we look back to our indigenous roots from where we come from, when was that marriage severed and why? When did we as humans change from being one with nature, being equal to, or actually less than? And when did we develop this dominant and supreme mindset over everything, and everything is ours to kill, to manage to extinction until it goes extinct, and we have the right to do that? When did we decide that everything of the natural world, everything that was, is, and belongs has no sovereignty, has no right to exist? Where did that come from? I'm not saying all of us have that mindset, but if we unconsciously have those philosophies, how do we undo them? And I think one of the things is, where, when, how did that get severed? What happened to a relationship-based way of living, way of life? Why did that change? Because I think if we look at our philosophies and the way we think and the way we're programmed, and we, remove some of those program chips from our minds and adopt the original, find the original, what it is to be indigenous from place, and what it is to be human and where we are on the totem pole. You look at our story poles and we're not the most important. We're not. Still today, our story poles, our talking sticks, our totem poles, humans are not the most important thing. So that's one place I would start is asking ourselves that question. What, if my relationship with nature was severed and I now have a belief system of this, when did that change and why? And how can I get back to my, the way I was probably designed, and we were all designed to live together, to be as one.
So there was whoops, sorry.
I think for us, our relationship with nature as a whole, or what the English word nature, I wouldn't say it's different, but I can confidently say that my family's relationship with the Southern residents has gone back hundreds of generations. So it's a family. And I think the transients, and I can't tell you when and how long and all of that, but definitely with the current condition, inability to repopulate, mother's inability to give birth and raise children obviously elevates the urgency and need for myself, my people, my children to fight and fight like hell, and do everything we possibly can to fix us. They don't need saving, we do. We can't save the whales. We can't save the salmon. We got to fix us. And that's, I mean, I don't mean to offend anybody ever, but that's my truth and my reality. They did just fine without us for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years. 16 decades we've done this. They don't need us to save them. They need us to fix or evaluate who we are as invasive species. I like to call myself an invasive species. I'll join that category because we all have to come together as one species, humans, if we want to fix ourselves. And that way the world can exist as it was designed. Cecilia, which means our grandmother or my grandmother. Yeah, Cecilia.
Politicians, decision makers, and also trade groups, special interest groups, development lines. Because essentially, this is what is approaching, you know, this black and white, this development doesn't really dive too well in space to nature.
Yeah.
So we're always in our approach. Senator and I understand, and all my friends understand, and yet there's a disconnect between even folks who are involved in this. They go on wonderful hikes and feel like they're blessed and welcome to a song, but when you go to work the next day, and I just have found that much of this problem lies within a self-consciousness problem. You know, it can be two different things within one body.
Yeah.
And so how I ask myself a lot. So just in the way of what you're doing, since you do it so on the forefront, so failure like this, you know, without using a home that we are part of this space. Well, what are the nuts and bolts of that? Well, try to, you know, talk to the politicians and developers. So I'm just wondering if you have any recommended part of the process.
Absolutely.
Okay. I apologize for interrupting. Is there any way you could repeat the question so our audiences at the Langley Whale Center could hear?
The question was, does Cecilia reach out to policymakers, governing bodies, as it relates to development and things going on that have gotten us to where we are today?
Thank you.
And yeah. And yes, in a couple of ways. One is I personally try not to pass up any opportunity to have conversations with kids, because action with Tokutai 5 years ago has led us to where we are today, which isn't very far, but it's progress. So if we speak to kids and not tell them how to think, but encourage them to think about how they think and think about the norms and what has become normal and how we're programmed through school systems to think and create that challenge and ask the question, who are you? Where are you going? Where are you from? What are you? And start that process there, because I think the future policymakers can really at a young age reflect on what has gotten us to where we are today, if they can see it. And one thing I encourage at every university, every school, every public school is teach true history. Teach the truth so that we can understand where we are. And we have to know what once was to understand where we are today, so that we can use basic math to tell where we're going to be in the next 160 years. So what is 320 double it? 340 years, 170 years since treaty, less, but 340 years from now. So 340 years total. If we just spend 340 years here, what's it going to look like? And basic math, I think, can tell you based on the trajectory we're on: extinction, pollution, da 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 da. And then you can look at Europe's history. It took much longer. Number two, great question. Yes, but you are it, right? You're a constituent to a certain leader somewhere. Each of you have an ability to share a story or question the thought process and policy making in a good way. I don't think fighting is going to get us anywhere, right? We put up our defense and then we don't want to work together. We just want to fight amongst each other. So I think cautious with our words, wise with our words, if we can be. English is tough. How do we create empathy or shift a thought process to think a different way as we make? That's why I think youth are a good source. But one example of how we attempted and maybe successfully have done so with different leadership to get to Cantwell, to get to Murray, to get to Biden, to get to others. One example of what Cecilia has done is we do totem pole journeys. We did do the totem pole too, and Deb Haaland, Secretary of Interior, received that totem pole year before last. We do things like that and stop all over the country on the way to Seaquarium in Miami with the pole that's coming here now. That thing has been on thousands of miles of journeys telling a story. Is one example that I'm proud of that Cecilia recently did is we met with the bishops of Washington State, Catholic bishops. Biden has a history of genocide within his own family and his people in Ireland. So how do you create empathy where most of the time our story, the Southern resident story and the salmon story, falls on deaf ear? Well, he can relate if he knows his history. So he's a Catholic, Cantwell's a Catholic, Murray's a Catholic. A lot of these leaders are Catholics. So rather than trying to tell the story directly to them and get to Biden, can we find something that is over any elected leadership position? And that goes back to faith a lot of times, and raise the question there on who we are. And should this be a policy decision, or is this a moral decision that needs to be made from a policymaker? And the bishops wrote a letter regarding the Snake River dams recently, and it was only one meeting with them. And I was here at Friday Harbor over Zoom and just asked them some simple questions from the Bible and how they felt about, how would you feel if the Jordan River was capped off, filled with sand? And they wouldn't like that. And I asked why. And they said, because a ceremony took place there and a baptism took place there with Jesus and John the Baptist. So they said it was a sacred place. Okay, what about these sacred places? What about other rivers? What about salmon? What about this? How come we can't take a moral position and lean on our electeds? So it led to a letter. So that's one of the ways we'll meet with different organizations and folks that have an ability to reach higher level. And that's one that I'm proud of. And we did as an organization, as people, as humans. So yeah, we try to get creative in how we work with policymakers or get messages to them.
Thank you so much.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you. Hi, Shka.